Whoever thought that making a player waste 2 hours before he can proceed with the game is an idiot. Here's a neat piece of information for those who aren't too familiar with it. Persona is actually a spin-off based on today's topic, Shin Megami Tensei If, a Japanese-only Super Nintendo game that asked a brave question, what if SMT took place at school? Which, I mean, the original Megami Tensei also took place in school, but it wasn't the predominant setting. This is probably one of the lesser known entries in the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, a name you've probably heard of but don't know too much about. Most people have heard about it thanks to Persona, which is a spin-off that reached massive popularity. Also, Persona 4 and 5 are some of the best JRPGs to come out in recent history. Anyhow, after I heard about the announcement to Shin Megami Tensei 5 coming out for the Switch, it got me in the mood to talk about this franchise in general, and I figured what better way to start talking about both Persona and the Shin Megami Tensei franchise at the same time than with the mainline entry that inspired the spin-off, which quickly overtook the mainline series in terms of popularity. As a heads up, this isn't any sort of recommendation, but just a fun look at a game probably most people haven't and aren't going to play. Before I get into it though, let me give a quick rundown of the Shin Megami Tensei series. SMT is a series that's been going on since the good old Nintendo days. Megami Tensei translates to the reincarnation of the goddess, and it was called that because in the first game, Megami Tensei, the story was literally based on the fact that the main heroine was the reincarnation of the goddess Izanami. When the franchise moved to Super Nintendo, they slapped on the word Shin, basically the word for true, which is commonly used for sequels, and that game performed so well that the series name just kind of stuck from that point on as Shin Megami Tensei, as opposed to Megami Tensei. As a heads up, although I'm sure it's pronounced as Shin, I'm going to pronounce it as Shin because I'm a dumb English speaker and will accidentally mess it up repeatedly if I keep on switching. SMT is known for being an incredibly dark modern RPG with a nihilistic look on religion, which probably didn't earn it any bonus points overseas since back then, America was super hardcore on censoring anything remotely religious in their games. And well, SMT was a kind of game where you saw the archangels like Gabriel, Michael, and so on smiting non-believers and enslaving humanity. Outside of that fact, the game was also probably too dark for Nintendo of America to even consider bringing it over. The SMT series differentiated itself from other JRPGs by having a modern setting and tackling plenty of themes as it pertains to our society. America's first exposure to SMT came in the form of Nocturne on the PS2, and the rest is history. I've been a huge fan of the Shin Megami Tensei series for quite some time, and while I first started by playing Persona 3 like most people, over the years I've gotten the chance to play through, I'd say, roughly nearly every entry in both the mainline series and the spin-offs. So yes, even the dancing games where you watch Yu Narukami bust move on the shadows, and even one or two of the very kid-friendly Devil Children games. As Shin Megami Tensei If is from the classic era of the franchise, that means we have all the trappings from the original series, the good and the bad. There are also a couple of novel ideas which I think were very innovative for the time, which I will get into. As with everything I cover, let's go over the premise. Hideo Hazama, a smart but bullied kid, attempts to get revenge by summoning a demon from the separate realm known as the Abyss. Something messes up, and the whole world gets warped into this demon realm, where the protagonist and his chosen partner work together to find a way out. While most SMT games are usually incredibly epic in scope, as you kinda have to be if the end goal involves fighting God or Lucifer, for this spin-off, series director Koji Okada wanted to pull back these large-scale worlds in favor of a much smaller one, so he decided to have the entire game take place at a school hub world, where portals to different dungeons of hell would appear for players to go through. One of the more interesting features of Shin Megami Tensei If is that they really try to bring back the whole reincarnation aspect of the series, since after the first Megami Tensei, it hasn't really been an important part of the series, and he has implemented this aspect in probably one of the most strangest and unique gameplay features I have ever seen in any JRPG. So, in SMT If, your main character and partner each have a spirit guardian of sorts, that is a demon from the series. This spirit guardian gives stat modifiers, and for your partner, additional spells. As with every old SMT game, your main character is unable to use any magic. Whenever you or your partner die in this game, they will be revived after battle with a new guardian that is dependent on several factors like how many battles you have won before dying, and what your current guardian is. So if you keep on dying in SMT If, the game gives you an absolutely terrible guardian that is worthless garbage, but if you go through a ton of battles before dying, then you will get a stronger guardian spirit compared to your last one. It's very strange, and the game never really explains how it works at all. You just accidentally die for the first time and bam, suddenly an old man revives you and gives you a new spirit guardian. Also, if your main character dies, you are sent back to the beginning of whatever dungeon you are in, which is a much nicer penalty than just straight ending the game like in most SMTs. I do find it strange how the reincarnation thing is a much bigger deal for your companion than yourself, since it modifies what spells they learn, while the protagonist just gets a stat boost or decrease. But still, it is a gameplay mechanic that I honestly haven't really seen that much before playing this game. The second novel idea that Shin Megami Tensei If has is how to implement the route system into the game. Shin Megami Tensei If, like most classic SMTs, has multiple routes. Except instead of a neutral law and chaos route, SMT If does something quite different. This might sound familiar to those who've played Persona, and I'll talk about it when I get to that game, but at the very start of SMT If, you start out in the classroom when the whole school gets sucked into the abyss. Your very first goal at that point is to seek out and find a partner to accompany you. What the game doesn't tell you that is whoever you pick first is a permanent choice, and decides which route and ending you get for the rest of the game. While I like the concept, I don't like how SMT If shoves Yumi Shirakawa as the first person you meet without any indication of the consequences in picking a partner, especially since her route is essentially Reiko's route, but without the final dungeon or final boss. I feel like they should have at least have some clue as to how important this is. After beating the game on a second playthrough, you unlock one more character, Akira, where you run through an entirely different set of dungeons and reach a different ending. I'm always a sucker for games introducing a novel route system, so I did enjoy this aspect of Shin Megami Tensei If, even if I have some problems with it. As for the actual story itself, it's nothing too special. Essentially, the game boils down to the protagonist and his partner getting taunted by Hazama, walking into a new dungeon that pops up, completing it, going back to school, walk into the next dungeon that unlocks, then get taunted by Hazama again. The main character is completely silent, so only your partner has some new dialogue throughout the game, but the dungeons themselves are just gauntlets to get through. While the story gets pretty wild in this series normally, SMT If was meant to be a much smaller story in scope, so it doesn't have as much going for it. While there are technically different routes and endings, a good chunk of the game is exactly the same, with Akira, who is locked into a second playthrough, being the only one with a drastically different experience. Overall, it's a fairly simple plot, with not too much of note happening in between. The ending has a decent enough backstory to the main villain himself. The problem is that you only really get to see it if you went on Reiko's route. Now, as for the gameplay itself, everything I'm about to mention and probably complain about is not just directed towards SMT If, it's endemic to all of classic Shin Megami Tensei. Don't get me wrong, I loved Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2, but these are not the kind of games I think most people who are used to more modern sensibilities can probably stand to play. Every classic Shin Megami Tensei runs as a dungeon crawling RPG wizardry style. The kind where you first-person view traverse a dungeon step by step, have to check your map constantly to make sure you aren't treading old ground because everything looks so dang similar. Movement is pretty slow. The transition effect every time you turn in particular feels like it should have been sped up twice as fast, which is funny because I already placed it on the fast option. Dungeon design is also really dirty, filled with panels that randomly turn your character in a direction with no indication it happened, or dropping you to a previous floor or even the beginning of the map. Teleporting randomly, tons of traps everywhere, removing the map entirely to confuse the player. It is what it is. Some of it is entirely awful. World of Sloth forces you to waste 7 full moon cycles, which took me about 2 hours of just walking back and forth just to progress. World of Envy has teleporting puzzles, invisible rooms, and a map disabling function, all at the same time while removing half your team, and the final area is just an absolute mess of restarting back to the beginning with a million different portals. Another part I just have absolutely no love for is how ridiculously random the persuasion aspect of Shin Megami Tensei If is. Persuasion has always been a hallmark staple of the series since the very beginning, where at any point during a battle, you can talk to an enemy demon to try and convince him to join your side through a bunch of random conversation topics. These conversations can end in many different ways, such as the demon giving you an item, escaping the battle, joining you, or more likely than any of that, they'll just surprise attack you after getting angry. Later games in the series make this aspect of the game much more lenient, and actually make more sense, where certain enemy types will have topics they like, or you can get support from your demons in helping conversations go along, or even just special abilities that just make this aspect of the game way easier. Since this is classic SMT, we get none of that. And I really have no idea how you're supposed to know if a demon finds a certain conversation good or not. I have had the same conversation with the exact same enemy, where the outcome was different each time. Usually, when you are trying to convince an enemy to join you, if you actually reach the become my ally topic choice, they'll ask for gifts to convince them. Problem is, most of the time they'll run away after taking your items, and if you don't have enough speed stat like I did, then well, too bad. No demons for you. Again, I have no idea if SMT 1 or 2 was the exact same thing and I just forgot about it, but trying to persuade demons to join me in SMT If was one of the worst experiences I've had in a long time. I could talk at length about more, like how you can't have demons of opposing alignments on a team, how you can't check weapons unless you're at one specific shop, but I think that about wraps up SMT If specifically. Again, not the most groundbreaking entry, but one that has some incredibly novel ideas. I thought the reincarnation aspect they tried to implement in SMT If was very cool, certainly not something I've seen done before. The whole partner route system was also a pretty neat idea. As for the rest of it, not really anything too special. If for some reason you're looking for a classic SMT experience, I would have just played the original Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2. The same team, Aeon Genesis, which did the translation for SMT If, also did SMT 1 and 2 a long time ago, and their translation is pretty good. SMT 1 and 2 are very solid JRPGs with some pretty crazy stories, and as long as you know you're getting into the classic old school BS dungeon design, it should be a fun time. As I already mentioned, I do love this franchise a lot, so I was pretty happy to have completed yet another one. Most likely, I'll end up talking about more Shin Megami Tensei, although maybe not right away. Some of my favorite games ever are part of this franchise, which I will highlight as I get around to talking about each one. Anyhow, if you enjoyed the video, the like button is down below. I'll probably cover more SMT in the future, as well as Japanese games and visual novels and everything in between. So if any of that sounds cool, the subscribe button is there as always. Notification all buttons as well if you want to stay updated on when my next video comes out. I got a Twitter, which I do post on. And with that, I'll see you next time.